I'd really like to introduce you to Valentine Ollawa. Valentine is very passionate about helping and working with organizations that are driving for a more just, inclusive, and democratic world. He serves as the Managing Director of Revenue for Mobilize, where he oversees the sales, marketing, and client services teams. I'm really excited to listen in on this chat. He is going to be in conversation with our own amazing community and events lead, Rob Rebar. Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Meg. I'll invite Valentine to the main stage here as well. Really looking forward to digging into this conversation today. And I think I just wanted to start, Valentine, by, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Where are you currently based? What do you do for Mobilize? And maybe a fun fact is, has there been a pandemic hobby that you've picked up over the last 2 years?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you, Meg, for the introduction as well. I'm based out of Houston, Texas, actually, but and I've been living there for about a year now since I relocated at the middle of the pandemic last year. So, but I've been at Mobilize roughly also about the same time, a little over a year, and my responsibility here is kind of overseeing the business side of what we get to do, the business and the client client side of what we do here at Mobilize, in the sense of working with organizations who are driving more democratic and inclusive initiatives around the country, and how we partner with them to make sure that they are successful in driving through those initiatives as well. So as Meg had mentioned, my responsibility kind of spans across all of our go-to-market teams and how we work with clients.
That's amazing. And I'm really interested in this conversation because I really want to dig into more what Mobilize is doing. We were talking in the green room. I live in a small-ish village in upstate New York. We're really trying to change kind of the old guard that's been in charge of the village for many years. There's been a lot of new blood moving into the village. But it's been very difficult because that older guard, I won't say their party, but they have very long stands in the community. They can kind of go to people that they've known 50 years and get them to sign an absentee ballot, while we have a lot less of these long-lasting connections in the community, and we're really trying to build that up. So really curious if you can tell us a little bit more about what Mobilize's mission is and how it can help, people like me or other people that are really looking to make lasting change in their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So a 30-second overview or backstory as to how Mobilize was started by the co-founders, actually, about roughly 3 years ago. It was started on the back of Women's March back in 2017, and as it was essentially as a result of we saw the need for grassroots and people-led drive and initiatives across the country, and that spun into what Mobilize has now become, where we work with several organizations, nonprofit organizations, advocacy groups, and political campaign organizations to think about how do we leverage communities, how do we leverage the power of communities to actually make an impact, whether that is by getting the right people, or getting the right political folks in office, or championing for ballot initiatives that drive the level of change that we want to see, that are inclusive, that are more democratic, and that are also driving toward just and more just outcomes. And so I think that's essentially what we focus on. And a lot of we're very selective in the organizations that we choose to work with. So we also do not work with every organization out there, whether for various reasons, because we also want to maintain the integrity of what we're doing and what we're helping people, volunteers, and supporters who also want to connect to these organizations to know exactly what they're going for, and how to participate in the right avenues that aligns with their values, their core values as well. So to go back to how do we try to make it easier for people like you, people like me, people from underrepresented communities, and people whose voices have not been very much championed over the past. We work with these organizations, and we want to make sure that organizations are being empowered, but also enabled from a technology standpoint, but also from looking at best practices. How do you engage people in remote areas where they they've gone through decades or several cycles of representation from a different party that has overlooked their needs or that has suppressed their votes in one ways or another. And so we work with these organizations to align with their own mission, align with what are they driving for, and we present all the technology tools to make this a much easier process for them. And in that process, we've over the past couple of years, we've grown our platform to be able to drive more volunteer and supporter-led initiatives in partnership with organizations. And we'll definitely talk a lot more about that.
Yeah, no, that reminds me a lot of how we approach our mission here at Power to Fly, where, we don't, if a company says, okay, we want to diversify their workforce, we're often then say to them, okay, but what are you doing? Can you show us, what you're doing to actually create a more diverse and equitable workplace before we really start working with you? So I definitely connect with you there. And you were talking about underrepresented groups, and I thought this figure that I saw in a recent survey was interesting. And because it said 56% of white people volunteer for some cause, while 19% of Latinx people, 11% of Black people, and 7% of AAPI people are volunteering. So I'm just curious what, there's so many root causes there, and often, so there's so many root causes, and I'm just curious what, where this lack of diversity in recruiting comes from, and what can organizations do if they're looking to really diversify the people that are volunteering for them?
Yeah, it's a very stark statistic, right? And what we have noticed with that, a lot of that stems from inaccessibility, whether that is inaccessibility to the right information, people across the communities of color not being privy to information or being privy to tools or access to these things that enables them to exercise their rights to the fullness of their capacity or their capability. And what we see organizations that are, especially in the 2020 cycle, begin to do is, again, technology helps to decentralize and also democratize access to a certain degree. And we are, partnering with organizations to help them tap into communities. So as an example, something that we saw in the past during the 2020 Victory 2020 cycle, were that up to 50% of first-time volunteers volunteered as a result of someone within their community actually hosting a get out the vote event, or hosting an event of some sort. And a reason why that is because people trust those that are in their community. They're less trusting of someone in power or someone, an elected official, if that person isn't championed or represented by someone in their immediate community. So what we began doing, working with organizations over the past year to do is looking at how they empower their own volunteers to now go back into their communities and create almost in a sense of creating grassroots campaigns or grassroots initiatives that also feeds up to the kind of broader organization. And so that's one way that we began seeing a lot of that change and trend. Another way to kind of what Mobilize now also does directly is we give out what we call grassroots or free accounts to organizations to just be able to drive their own initiatives and do things that are subsidized almost in a sense by the bigger organizations that are kind of paying to use Mobilize. And we provide other organizations that do not have the resources but still want to get out there and drive change to be able to do the same, and have the exact same resources to drive that out. And I think that has been, in a way, it has helped a lot of organizations and a lot of underrepresented communities to still be able to get their voices heard.
That's great. And I mean, speaking of some of those big organizations that you mentioned, you all have worked with the Biden-Harris campaign, the Human Rights Campaign, the Sierra Club, the New York City 2020 census. So some really big names there. And I'm just curious, maybe from one of these more grassroots examples, are there other kind of success stories or a specific example that pops into your mind that was successful?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are quite a few, right? There are quite a few. I'd say that one that we were extremely proud to have been a part of, and we saw a direct, direct excitement in those communities where the Georgia State Senate runoff. I think that was a really, really huge, that was a huge undertaking by, Stacey Abrams' organizations, by, the Georgia State Party, by a number of organizations that were all working towards how do we get the right people into the Senate office in Georgia. And so we saw a huge mobilization efforts across both people within the state of Georgia, but we also saw just about the same number of volunteering efforts from people outside of the state of Georgia. So we saw folks, from across Western states, from across the mid and southern states, also volunteering for these organizations to make phone calls, to send out, to do text banking, and to do a lot of virtual events and activities that were driving more awareness in the state of Georgia, that were driving more, voter turnout and voter registration, and also subsequently voter turnout in the state of Georgia. So we saw a number of those that were, that ultimately led to the victories that, for, Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff there in Georgia. I would say another one that we've seen as a recent success also is the vaccination effort by the organization Made to Save, which is an initiative or a sub-organization under Civic Nation that works with the with President Biden's administration to drive towards its goal of, its July 4th goal of vaccinating, getting as many Americans vaccinated as possible. And so that was also a huge effort ran on the back of Mobilize, that we were just happy to support them and support their initiatives towards driving a lot of that, towards driving the outcomes that they saw. So there's something that I would say that the team here at Mobilize can be proud of, but more so that we were able to support, and get into communities that, where they wouldn't have had the opportunity to.
That's amazing. And thinking about the Georgia runoff and, of course, the presidential election, both of those were occurring, of course, during the pandemic. We're now, maybe starting to ease out of the pandemic a bit. And I'm curious, over the course of your year with Mobilize, how have you seen volunteerism really change, and where do you see it going into the future? Because I'm sure there's been some things that you've really had to create maybe during the last, year and a half that, you want to hold on to, and other things that, of course, had to go by the wayside that you're now looking to bring back. So where do you see it moving, volunteerism as a whole and Mobilize as a company, in the post-pandemic future?
Yeah, that's a great point. For context, we shifted from being a platform that we saw 25%, roughly 25% virtual, volunteerism in March, and overnight it became about 99% virtual, event and volunteer engagement in March, and has since sustained, roughly those levels, are above the 80% virtual volunteering leading up to now. And I think we definitely see that being here to stay. And one of the key reasons why we see organizations still relying on or doubling down on virtual, being able to do a lot of virtual volunteering, is because it provides more accessibility. It creates more access to folks who may have not traditionally had the time to go to a physical location and do an event or volunteer for an event. It also gives the opportunity for these organizations to tap into a broader set of network. And so going back to what we saw in Georgia, where almost 50% of the people who drove actions that led to the victories in Georgia happened from folks who are out of state. So again, it provides a lot more access, and it's also when we think about more of the more elderly folks who also want to still continue to participate. Getting to a location, getting to and from a location may have its difficulty, but being able to do some of these things online or virtually, we also saw a rise in that trend as well. And we do feel that a lot of that is here to stay. So what we want to continue to do is, how do we build simpler tools to create more accessibility so that organizations can continue to help drive out these actions, so organizations can continue to get more people, regardless of the locations where they are, to be able to still take actions, whether that is signing petitions or even low bar entry level actions such as signing petitions, to even things that are more complex such as virtual canvassing, or even being able to the other part where we see some of the trends go into is volunteers now becoming leaders. And that's another area that we continue. We saw some trends around that in the Victory 2020 as they relied heavily on volunteer hosts to be able to support, to drive supporter-led events that changed the course of the conversation and the level of awareness to get people out to vote. So we see a lot more of that, and we want to continue to build on top of that, so folks get the ability to, again, build more leadership skills within their with their volunteering experiences, can also take their volunteering experiences from organization to organization and still have a history of what they've been able to help organizations to achieve, how they've helped organizations to drive change, and most importantly, we want to continue to help a lot of advocacy groups who are driving for ballot initiatives to continue to be successful. So the more we want to help them provide that, lower the barrier of entry for volunteers across the country to do the work that they want them to do, it only helps to drive the change that we want to see.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking from experience, back to the recent campaign that we were somewhat tangentially involved in, but it was very easy for my partner and I to sit there and text 50 people. There was a heat wave here, and so it was hard to get outside, but sitting on our couch, making sure we texted 50 people was very easy. And then, but on top of that, the system we were using was really still made for old traditional phones. So which, we were trying to say oh, no one's picking up their phone anymore. So those kind of updates, it's great to see that, you're really leading the charge on and using technology really to drive these changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd love to see, talk a bit about, something that you've touched on a couple of times throughout this, but it's really, in addition to just making it easier for people, because that's such a big thing on top of work, family, personal life. We've been dealing with this pandemic. It's hard. I feel like people just say, oh, volunteering, it's going to be such a time suck for me, on top of getting my kid to school in the morning. So what would you say to people like that? Or how can they use that? How can the platform specifically help those people, maybe on top of some of the other things that you've already mentioned?
Yeah, it's a really good point. We all have a very, very finite amount of time each day, and we have very real responsibilities within our work lives and family lives. And it's okay for people to not feel that they have to always volunteer, for an organization or to do so many different things. And what we want to continue to do on the Mobilize platform is continue to get as many diverse set of volunteer opportunities, as many diverse set of volunteer actions that folks can take, as you mentioned, right? Being able to kind of sit on the couch and send text messages, so, to be able to drive, to help an organization drive an initiative, provide more awareness. I received, a number of text messages from different organizations as well, whether that is, the Sierra Club or, as we talked briefly, from Texas Democratic Party around some of the key things that are going on within the state that I currently live in now. But a lot of these help to drive awareness and our low barrier of entry initiatives and actions that anyone could do anywhere. It could be while on a train commute if you're in a city like New York and things like that. But I think most importantly is I think folks should take the time for themselves, understand what causes or what initiatives that they are truly aligned with and that they want to be aligned with, so that it feels more natural for them to volunteer with organizations or opportunities around that, right? We see, we see a lot of organizations on the Mobilize platform who are driving and championing for, racial and gender equity, like the Human Rights Campaign, or there's so many others. We see organizations like Common Cause, and so we see a lot of these organizations who are just providing as many opportunities. So there are tons of things for anyone to be fine to do, and I think that's what we folks have found very unique about Mobilize is by going to the website, you can identify your current location and what you want to be able to participate in, and also do it at your free time, at your leisure, and doesn't need to compete with your work or personal thing. But also it's important to take care of your own personal space and your mental space to be able to fully give to an organization.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And you can't volunteer for everything. So, figuring out where your passions lie. And as you said, there are some more, easier things you can do, like signing petitions and things like that, or what I did, sitting on a couch and sending text messages.
I love that.
I love, I got one person wrote just back stop, as if I was a robot, but I was in fact a human being. So
Right.
I appreciated that. And earlier we were talking a bit about kind of a racial breakdown of volunteerism, but I was looking at this other study from Zippia. It actually is just from 2020, and they were saying that women are about 59% more likely to volunteer for a cause than men. Here at Power to Fly, about 90% of our community are women,
Mhm.
though we have many strong male allies like myself and yourself who are joining. So I'm just curious, have you have you also seen this at Mobilize, this kind of breakdown, or why do you think that is? And maybe what are ways that we can also diversify, not just in terms of race, but in terms of gender as well?
Yeah, we definitely, at the end of 2020, we also, looked into our own analytics as well. And we saw that there, it's roughly about a 60-40 breakdown, women to men. And in some ways, I think it's incredible to see that. It's incredible to see women stepping up and leading men. And I think that's one thing, in one area that we want to continue to champion and draw more awareness that for men across all ages, that there are lots of opportunities to, for us to also step up, for us to also kind of provide more of a, more support to organizations that are also championing for the things that we care about, the things that also affects us. And not only can not just put that, responsibility onto women to, carry the torch. So I think, as you mentioned, Rob, right, there are a number of initiatives that we want to continue to do. Again, part of that is continue to provide more awareness to communities and to communities and even folks within those communities, that there are opportunities, breaking down the stigma that it's cool to volunteer, because again, you are driving change. You're driving change. Everyone wants to be like, the folks who we continue to see, in the media, who are saving democracy, right? You see amazing women's faces, and we see a lot of people kind of championing for some of the work. And so we also recognize that we want to continue to make sure that, men and male figures, as well as just everyone, continue to see that there are great opportunities to step up and support women, but also to make their voices heard, champion for things that they care about, champion for things that the women in their lives care about, most importantly as well.
Yes, and we've seen so many amazing women running for office, and certainly I don't have the stats in front of me, but we just definitely heard about the power.
Look at Boston.
Yeah,
look at Boston. Boston is now like almost all of their mayoral candidates are Black women, and just women in general. We've seen just in across the country, there are a lot of offices are being contested by women now, and so I think it's really incredible to see, and we want to continue to do much more to support women who are not only running but volunteering, but also challenge more male figures to step up.
Totally. And yeah, I believe the New York City Council will be majority women for the first time ever, which is kind of flabbergasting. And we've actually done a past talk with Vote Mama, which is another great organization encouraging women to run for office and to support those women who are running for office. So definitely suggest anyone checking that out online as well. But we did have a great question in from Dara, and I'm not sure if this is a company that you're familiar with, Valentine, but Dara's asking, she's wondering your thoughts on volunteer-based organizations like Extinction Rebellion that works as a self-organization system versus having a centralized leadership.
So I'm not familiar with that organization, but if I can reiterate the question, or to see if I get the same understanding of what's being asked, and then what are my thoughts on volunteer-based organizations, just in general, that are self-organizing or maybe decentralized from a leadership perspective versus having a centralized leadership. In some ways, I think there is empowerment for multiple leaders to be able to drive one, understand the mission of that organization, and the mission and who they serve, and be able to drive that. As long as there is a strong kind of interconnectedness across all the various folks who are stepping up to be leaders within their own different groups, then it continues to drive things forward for that organization, and they're able to achieve their mission. But in some cases, we do see having centralized leadership be very helpful to kind of, again, set guidance, but also doesn't mean that that individual or those set of individual holds the ultimate power. Power is still being flattened out and distributed out so that people can take on ownership. And again, even in some ways, that is one of the areas we are championing within Mobilize, with Mobilize's platform, and what we call distributed organizing or distributed campaign. And again, because we want organizations to be able to lean on volunteers, lean on community leaders, lean on community activists to drive and build many grassroots campaigns within the organization that, again, feeds into the larger parent or the larger, broader organization's initiative. So it's not lost on that. And I think that there is a general sense of building more distributed campaigns. But from a leadership perspective, I think it depends on the organization.
No, that's great. Yeah. And it almost reminds me of the way we're now approaching work in so many ways, where because we're in this hybrid and remote atmosphere, there's a little bit more agency sometimes people have, but you do still sometimes need that central leadership to go back to, even if people are kind of out on satellites doing their own thing. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. I'd love to just end by letting everyone know where they can find out more about Mobilize. Maybe, if you want to share any of like the other upcoming campaigns that you might be working on, or other ways that people can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I would say the easiest way to find out about Mobilize is mobilize.us. Not only does it provide you, upon landing there, with all sorts of volunteer opportunities within your geography, it also provides you with best practices on how to also grow into becoming a volunteer leader or becoming a community leader in one way or another and drive change. And you can learn from what other organizations have done to impact change, like such as the Fairness Project, HRC, and Sierra Club and others. So I would say mobilize.us. And as far as other things that we're working towards, we are still, we continue to work with, the Democratic organizations, the state parties who are, again, contesting for, very heavily contested campaigns and seats in their respective counties, cities, and states. So please definitely encourage folks to reach out and find ways to volunteer or find ways to provide ideas to, and support their own local communities as well. So we want to drive as much change as possible. And I realized I didn't answer my pandemic hobby. It's road trips.
Oh, yes. Well, you were saying that you're on a road trip right now. So, that almost ties in perfectly with kind of volunteerism, because you're kind of getting out into the world and seeing people, meeting new people, going to new places.
Absolutely. And I try to also volunteer in other cities when I do visit them. So it's always a great way for me to kind of see what's going on in a given city and just find a way to support and do a few volunteering opportunities. So, but if anyone wants to reach out, I'm always happy to connect them to the right places or right people.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being here. I know I'm going to definitely be checking out Mobilize. I hope everyone else listening is as well. And thank you again. You're doing some amazing work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.